Hello and welcome to another episode of Great American Underdog, where we share stories of strength and success. Today, I have a very special guest with me, someone who's very special to my life, has been a mentor to me, both personally and professionally. He is a father, keynote speaker, seminar leader, coach, and consultant. He is also the host of the Persistent Rumor podcast, and is known by his alter ego, Chocolate Yoda, spelled Yodddah, because film studios are litigious. It is my honor to welcome Francisco Acosta. Francisco, welcome, my friend.
Hello, hello. This actually might be one of the very few times that I'm using my real name on a podcast. So much I
Right?
like you.
Well, I thank you for that. And thank you for being here, of course.
Sure.
So just to get started, Francisco, we have a lot of topics we're going to cover today, just about your upbringing and your underdog story and some other belief systems that you have that I'm excited to share with our audience. But just to get started, I start every episode like this. I'm curious, what is your favorite underdog story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction?
I'll go with the first one that jumped into my head, although there's lots to choose from, but Nelson Mandela. I think he's the archetypal underdog. This is a man who was imprisoned for 27 years for essentially being a dissident. And when he emerged, he became the first democratically elected president in Africa. And he was being urged, and I mean urged, by his administration to seek revenge on the people that had imprisoned him and the people that represent the people that had imprisoned him. And he refused to do it. And, the film Invictus is about him as president, but also covers his incarceration. And the reason why it's called Invictus is because of a poem named Invictus that talks about essentially how you can imprison my body, but you can't have my spirit. And it's just, he was just a giant among humans.
Right.
I feel privileged that I lived at the same time that a man like that was on earth. And if you want to categorize his story as an underdog story, it's probably the best one that I can think of.
Yeah, I love that, Francisco, obviously, because of who he was as a human being and what you just elaborated. And, you mentioned the body and the spirit. And I think that, to be an underdog in your own life, the spirit has to be stronger than anything, right? You have to be able to look past your external physical environment and realize that there is something on the other side of the obstacles you might be facing. Would you agree?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's how you get someone like Stephen Hawking, who didn't let his physical limitations limit anything else in his life.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it. And just switching gears to you and your story, from that, I thank you for sharing that. I love hearing what people's idea of an underdog story is, and yours is a real one about a real person that definitely overcame what seemed insurmountable obstacles. So thank you for sharing that. Moving to you, talk to me a little bit about where'd you grow up, man? What was that upbringing like, and talk to me about some of maybe the early challenges in your life.
Sure. Well, for starters, I am an immigrant to these shores. I don't refer to America as the United States because it's never been. So that's a misnomer, in my opinion. Um, I was born in the Dominican Republic in 1964. In just over a month, I turned 60. And when I was 2 years old, my family came to America fleeing a military uprising. And like all good Dominicans, we moved to Washington Heights, New York City, because there seems to be a rule that that's where Dominicans go when they come to America. And we followed that rule. And that was actually a great upbringing. I know from understanding the history of Washington Heights that for the adults, it probably wasn't that great. because it was a ghetto, it was a poor neighborhood. But for children, it was idyllic because that whole "it takes a village to raise a child" was embodied in Washington Heights. Like, I can vividly remember any time that we were out playing, if you looked up into the windowsills and the fire escapes, you would see moms looking down over the children, making sure that they were okay. Of course, there was a double-edged sword to that level of safety. It also meant that you had a lot of snitches watching you, and, if you messed up, the neighborhood lady that knew your mom, she'd swat you and then call your mother and tell her how you messed up, and then you get home and get swatted again, but nothing ever happened to the children in that area because everybody knew everybody. Like, I remember that my mother's free time was extremely limited, because she was a single mother. She divorced my father after we came to America because he was a physically abusive man, and, she was just working all the time, but her free time was filled visiting people. It was always on the weekends, I always had to dress up and be dragged around town to the neighbors because that's how my mother maintained the relationships in the neighborhood, and she was doing the right thing. She was maintaining her network so that if she ever needed anything, people would come and help, and so it was a really beautiful kind of environment that I was raised in, but unfortunately, that ended rather prematurely. It didn't end right away. She remarried when I was 7, and, she and my stepfather decided to move to Elmhurst, Queens, which was much closer to where they met at the job, which was in also in Queens. And Elmhurst was almost exactly like Washington Heights, except more Asians. That's basically the only difference. My block looked like the United Nations. We just had everybody. So that was the environment for the first 9 years of my life. I didn't know the world was any different than that, and I
Sure.
had never had a cause to think about the people in my neighborhood because it was just multicultural. That was just life. Then we took a turn. 2 years after we moved to Queens, my mother and stepfather bought a house in a tiny little place on Long Island, a place so tiny it's only a square mile, and I describe it as the town you drive through to get to other places. It's called Malvern, Long Island, not to be confused with Malvern, Pennsylvania. It's actually spelled slightly differently. There's no E at the end. And Malvern, Long Island is next to a town that other people will recognize, which is Valley Stream, Long Island. Now, there was a bit of an irony to moving to Malvern, and I'll put it in perspective in a moment. But the irony was that Malvern was the first school district on all of Long Island that integrated. However, we moved about 2 blocks outside the school zone, and back then, you had to go where you were zoned. It's not like it is now where you could send your child to any school you want. Back then, whatever school zone you were in, that's the school zone that you were going to. And because I was outside that school zone, I did not go to the integrated school. I went to the all-white school system in Valley Stream, and that's where the troubles began. And they didn't ratchet up immediately, although I started hearing words that I had never heard before, people driving by in their cars, yelling nigger and things like that. And it was an uncomfortable environment, but it really ratcheted up once I got into junior high school because now I was with children that I didn't know and all this other stuff. And then that's when the physical violence started, and I had to get into a lot of fights. And so it was a pretty miserable time of my life, interspersed with good things, but it was a situation where basically I came out of it with PTSD without knowing that. So for the longest time, I was just a balled fist. I had a hair trigger temper, and I was ready to rock and roll at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. Yeah, because you knew I guess you knew you kinda had to be like that in that environment because you had unexpected things happen every day, or even if it was expected and you knew there was going to be some form of verbal abuse or physical altercation, you're walking around tense all the time, right? So was that the first couple moments in your life, Francisco, where you developed courage, where you felt like you had to step up to defend yourself? Or was it later on in your life? Because it sounds like early on, the emotional element of it was just more of a fight or flight. Like, okay, I'm going to get pressed and I'm going to have to react in the face of fear. So, talk to me a little bit about the courage element there and how you felt.
That's actually a really interesting question, and I've never considered that aspect of it. And the reason why is because I grew up fighting. In Washington Heights, you get into fights. And so there was never a conscious decision making process where I was like, okay, now I'm in enemy territory and now I got to rock and roll. None of that happened. It was all reaction, it was all in the moment. Um, you know, Another irony was that I was a very popular child. Even though I was very shy, I was very popular. I'm a fun guy. I'm funny. I got a great sense of humor, all that stuff. I make people laugh. I was tall. So, there were a lot of elements there that worked in my favor. But at the same time that I was popular with the children who knew me, I was unpopular with the children that didn't. And so there was never a conscious thing about what I was going to do. If someone got in my face, I was ready to rock. That's all it was.
So the elements of understanding courage weren't really there early on.
No, no. I think the way that I summarized my internal constitution was that I felt kind of crazy, and that's how I was perceived also, because the physical attacks in junior high school didn't last that long because people realized that it was a mistake to pick on me because I was ready to move to violence in the blink of an eye, and my violent reaction was almost always overwhelming to the person that attacked me. I didn't meet violence at the same level that it was given to me. I always went over the top, and that became a very dangerous situation for people who decided to come at me.
Yeah, well, it's also a deterrent, as you know, because same thing. My story with the
Yeah.
boxing element.
Yeah, and ironically, my last fight was right before I got into martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah, so it drove you in that direction, and, for you and me, learning an art form of some kind, I'm sure changed you for the better. Would you say that, getting into martial arts was one of the biggest takeaways from the negative of that environment?
Yeah, but the interesting thing was I didn't get into martial arts because I wanted to fight people. I got into martial arts for the art. I was fascinated by it. Because I was an athlete, right? And I could play any sport that you threw me in because I could mimic movement. But what fascinated me about martial arts was that I couldn't mimic those movements. I couldn't figure out how to get my leg in the air and do the things that these people were doing. And I remember literally the image that drove me to run to my mother and say, "Ma, I want to take karate." It was a martial arts exhibition going on at Madison Square Garden, and in the New York Post there was an advertisement for the exhibition, and Ernie Banks, who was very famous in martial arts, there was a picture of him standing on one leg with the other leg straight up in the air, which is a famous test of fitness and technique in the world of martial arts. And so I saw this photo and I tried to do that and couldn't figure out how to do that. So I was like, I got to get to a class. I want to learn how to do that. And eventually I did, but that's what got me into it. The the side benefit of that is really probably where the courage started. But again, I had no real conscious awareness of it because I think that that experience of learning how to hurt someone, because in martial arts, it's sort of like a phaser, right?
Um,
You could set yourself to stun, maim, or kill, right? So, like, you learn how to manipulate another person's body to the point of ending their life, right? But you also learn the increments before that. So if you just want to stun someone into the moment, because some people lose the moment, right? And sometimes, like, you see it in films once in a while. It's not so popular anymore, but you see it once in a while. Someone's freaking out and someone slaps them. That in psychology, that would be called a pattern interrupt, and that violence brings them that stunning violence brings them into the moment, and it's a pattern interrupt for the garbage that was going on in their mind, right? So as a martial artist, you learn how to do that. Then, if you need to stop someone from attacking you, you can maim them. You can break a finger. You can, chop a tracheal. You can do all sorts of things on the soft tissue of their body and the ligaments of their body that will cause them to stop wanting to hurt you. And if that doesn't work, then you can end their life if you have to. And being a martial artist is a lot like being a gun owner because when you talk to gun owners, they use the same language that martial artists do, which is I don't want to take this out because once I take this out, I know I have to use it. Right. So and being a martial artist is like carrying a concealed weapon.
yeah, I feel very similar with the boxing element, right? It's
Yeah,
a
it's the
def
same
that
thing. It's just a different martial art.
yeah, exactly. And I always said, and I've said this to you before, it's that you when it's practice, it's a calm in a state of chaos, right? Like
Hmm.
you recognize the environment is going to get physical or violent, and at times it's offense for the sake of defense, and it's that switch that you turn on that says, "Okay, am I in stun mode or am I in kill mode?"
Yeah.
And once you turn it on, it's like, "All right, well, you brought that on and you brought it out of me, so that's why it's here." So I
Yeah.
totally understand that. Just switching gears, Francisco, talk to me a little bit about now. We met in a professional environment. I have to include this, of course, in our episode. You had inspired me in the world of sales and just as a human being, so much so that you taught me a William Shakespeare quote that I ended up getting tattooed on my chest because I believed in it so much so, and it was so impactful during our conversation. It's our
Yes.
doubts are traitors that make us lose the good. We oft may win by fearing to attempt. And that has stuck with me forever, as you know, and thank you. So we met in that professional sales environment, and I took that away. But talk to me a little bit about, what was your first job, and then kind of how did you end up in sales?
My first job is really the reason why I wound up in sales. The place where my mother and stepfather met, because he hired her, and then 6 months later they were married. And
Oh,
it was and is still a plumbing supply house. And I worked in the warehouse, and this was an enormous warehouse. It was the shape of two football fields, like in the shape of a T. And plumbing supplies can be very heavy, like 500-pound cast iron steel tubs, which I had to wheel around on a hand truck. Okay. And I was 15 years old at the time. And I hated that job. And part of what I hated about it, it was really twofold. It was just physically exhausting, but also everybody that worked there was miserable. All of the adults that this is what they did full time for a living, they absolutely hated it. Right. Not so much the salespeople. They were doing okay, but the grunt workers in the warehouse, they hated it. And at the same time that I got this job, my brother was in his second year of college, and he had a conversation with me that was a very innocuous conversation. He was just basically laying out what he thought his future was going to look like. and he said, "Yeah, I'm gonna graduate college in 2 years. I'll get a job. I'll work there for 40 years, and then I'll get a pension." And that horrified me. And, in conjunction with my experience at my first job ever, I I had the conscious thought that there's no way that I can do what he just described. I've got to find another way. And 5 years later, I got into my first sales job.
So unbeknownst to you, that entrepreneurial journey started with that mindset of, okay, that's the contrast. Like that's the opposite of what I want in my life. And I can definitely relate to that. And I think anybody that's taken the entrepreneurial journey of being in sales or starting their own business can as well, because you grow up and you hear go to school, get a job, have a pension, retire, have kids,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whole gamut of what life's supposed to look like. And to some
Right.
people, they just don't want to subscribe to that, and
Right. Right. And when you asked me what my topic was, I said the Great American Lie, and that's what I was referring to.
yeah,
That prescription is what I refer to as the Great American Lie. Now, of course, it's not unique to America, but in America, they promote the idea that money will fix everything.
sure.
And of course, it's just not true. Like, if you go on Instagram on any given day, and I know we're kind of getting off topic a little bit, but you go on Instagram any given day, someone is going to tell you that money will fix all of your problems. Someone's going to tell you that money's going to make you happy. I even saw some guy very arrogantly saying, anyone that says money can't make you happy never retired their parents. And I'm like, dude, you just proved my point. It isn't the money that made you happy. It was the ability to retire your parents that made you happy. Doing something good for your parents made you happy. Money was the conduit to that.
The tool,
And look, I like to remind everybody as often as I can that I am no better than a talking monkey. And I don't say that as an insult. I happen to love monkeys. I think they're amazing, but I'm
right?
just a talking monkey. However, I think I'm intelligent enough to understand what I see day after day right in front of me. And it leads me to a simple equation, which is in the form of a question. If money could make you happy, then wouldn't anyone or everyone with money be happy? Right. And clearly, everyone with money is not happy because money can't make you happy. Money can pay your bills. Money can give you choices about where you're going to eat, where you're going to live, what you're going to drive, what you're going to wear, blah, blah, blah. Money can only address money stuff. It's not going to stop your friends and loved ones from getting hurt, getting sick, and dying. It's not going to stop that for you either. Like Steve Jobs proved the point of the lyrics in Dust in the Wind when they said, all your money won't another minute buy.
Right. And, even in the business world with what my business partner, Sandy Sarami, and I do, we talk about make a difference first and the dollars will follow. And so many people get into sales because they're worried that they want to make the big, big bucks. Right. And they get very transactional and close minded. And oftentimes they feel the best closers are the best salespeople. And when really it's the best openers and relationship builders that are the best salespeople. And if you make a difference in somebody's life, the byproduct is making those dollars. And then the dollars are, like you said, a conduit, a tool to doing the things you truly want to do for yourself or for others in your life. Right. So it's remarkable.
Yeah, and also in sales, especially in the environment that you and I were in, where residual income was involved, closing someone isn't as important as retaining someone. I mean, you got to close business, but if you're not retaining that business, then you're screwed, right? You're not building your portfolio. And if you just seek to close by any means necessary, which is high pressure or whatever it is, you're going to have a lot of attrition in your portfolio. Okay. My attrition was extremely low because when my sales process was always consultative, like not in the very beginning, I was actually a terrible salesperson in the very beginning. And people think I'm saying that to be humble. There's not a humble bone in my body, okay? I'm not saying anything out of humility. I was absolutely terrible at sales, but the way I got good at sales was understanding that sales was about communicating and making a connection with another human being. And I watched the episode that you did with Sandy, and that's what you guys talked about. And it was spot on. You know, any monkey can learn a script, okay? But if you don't understand how to communicate with someone, because look, no matter how great we think our product or service is, it is not going to serve the needs of every prospect that we're talking to. And when I trained salespeople, I would always tell them, if what we have doesn't help them solve a problem, walk away. Because if you force that fit, you're going to lose that person.
Yeah, it's the imposter, right? Like compared to the target audience, do you have a imposter in front of you, quote unquote? Some people might say it that way compared to, do I have my ideal client in front of me? And it's about asking the right questions to find out if that's true. As you know, when did you first start coaching and consulting, Francisco? And what led you to that? Like when did you get the after, I know you had your sales career and that's been continuous for you. And I know you've had some stories like selling vacuums at the very beginning of your career, and we've talked about that. But what flipped for you that brought you to wanting to help others in that world, or just coaching in general?
Interestingly enough, it was another thing that was never a conscious decision.
Interesting.
My entire life, people have sought my advice, and I never knew why. When I was 12, other 12-year-olds were coming to me for advice, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was an offshoot of the fact that I was an incorrigible liar when I was a child. And so when people came to me with problems, I was always scheming to figure out how to solve them for them, right? But as I got older, what I realized is that I enjoyed helping people, and genuinely, right? Some of that has to do with getting into personal development myself in 1987. And by the early 90s, I found that I was in an environment where I was helping people out a lot. And I sort of made it a side thing, but quite honestly, I've almost made no money on coaching. It was never a thing that I wanted to do for a vocation. It's something that I do as a passion. And if money comes my way because of it, that's fine. It's the same attitude I have about podcasting. But um, like, as we were saying before we started rolling, when you sat down in my office in 2015, my job was to um, give you the landscape of the business and prepare you to be a salesperson for our organization. And I failed miserably at that goal because as we were talking, I decided that what was more important in that moment was the human being that was sitting in front of me and the challenges that you faced at that time. And not that your life was a mess or anything serious or dire was going on, but there were some things that I recognized that you had as challenges, which is why I gave you that quote. Because as you were talking, I was hearing that doubt was creeping into your mentality, and so I gave you that Shakespeare quote, and then you freaked me out when you sent me the photo of the tattoo that you had gotten. But that was a beautiful moment for me because again, I love inspiring people, and you showed me, look how much you inspired me. And that's it's just a beautiful thing. And so coaching has been part of my life for a very, very long time. But I would say consciously, it was really the early 90s when I started like really making an effort to coach people.
When you went to what seminar or development did you go to in '87? What was it that kicked it off for you?
Well, so in '87, it was, one of the anonymous programs, right? And we're not supposed to say these things in public, right? So I'm not gonna name it, but, um, I was with someone at the time that had a real hardcore substance abuse problem, and when she came out of detox, well, actually, the day she went into detox was the day that I decided to stop drinking and using drugs, but it had nothing to do with the idea that I thought I had a problem.
Right.
What I thought was if she comes out and I'm still drinking and she's not, she's going to leave me. So it was a codependent thing. It was literally fear based. I was afraid she was going to leave me. So I stopped using so that I could maintain the relationship. And when she came out, she started going to these nightly meetings and I went with her. And I didn't identify myself as an addict or alcoholic, even in these meetings. What I said was, I'm with her, right? And here's what happened. Here's why I'm still in this process of self-development almost 37 years later, is that every night I heard 3, 4, or 5 people talking about the horrendous things that they did in their lives when they were drunk or high. And while I was sitting there listening to these people for about 3 months when it finally set in, I was like, wow, I've done almost everything that these people have described, but I was sober when I did most of the stuff. So I was like, oh, my problem is not a substance. And nobody has a problem with substances beyond the physical addiction part.
Mhm.
The problem is really just being an asshole. That was my problem, right? So that's what I was addressing. And, I also had a 2-year-old child and it occurred to me that, oh my God, this little bugger is gonna be looking at me to figure out how to live, and I have no idea how to do that. So I better get my act together. So I had a couple of things motivating me to do it. And the reason I continued is because I like the person that I became through the process of self-development.
And through the process of self-development, is that where you started to really, and obviously through your sales career, I'm sure, is that where you started to really understand um, more about people and their belief systems? Like we're going to get into that soon. What drove you to be so intrigued about how people tick? Because I'm very much like that as well. When I find somebody that has a different viewpoint or grew up differently, I want to know, how did you get to that? So for me, belief systems are very important. I'm curious, what drove you to that?
So the first thing that motivated me to understand how humans think and behave was, as I mentioned earlier, I was an incorrigible liar. I lied all the time as a child, to the point where when I was 9 years old, I made the conscious decision to stop lying. And what I said to myself was, oh, lying is for babies. Only babies lie. So I started telling the truth. And I got in so much fucking trouble as soon as I started telling the truth that I said, fuck this. I'm going back to lying. And that lasted another 14 years until I got into self development. And then I recommitted to being an honest person. But when I was by the time I was 9 years old, I can confidently say that I had a very keen understanding of how people thought. And because you have to, in order to lie to people effectively, you have to understand how people think, right?
Hmm.
So I was a good closer even at 9. And I never got caught lying, not once, right? So I was very, very good at it. And then when I got into self-development, the motivation was I really want to understand, and this is where belief systems come into it. I really want to understand how people operate so that I can operate better. And to understand how people operate or how you operate as a human being, you have to understand belief systems. To put it succinctly, your belief system is how you know everything in the world. And very often, your belief system has a lot of erroneous information in it. It has a lot of
Yeah.
decisions that you made as a child. Like, you know how 0 to 7 is referred to as your formative years?
Hmm.
Well, what you're forming is your understanding of the world. And then as you get older, there's some other things that are added to that, like your sexuality and things like that. But for the most part, almost everything that you believe is going to be concluded by the time you're 7 years old. Unfortunately, as you get older, the understandings of a 7 year old are not going to sustain you, right? So many of us are just what I call giant toddlers. We have a lot of inefficient information, a lot of erroneous information in our belief system that never gets revised. And the process of my self development brought me to a place where I had to become keenly knowledgeable. I had to become an expert in belief systems in order to help myself. And I did, and I devoted myself to it night and day. I mean, this is and I know this sounds like a dumb thing to say, but there is not a day that goes by where I don't do at least one thing to try to be a better human being. That doesn't mean I succeed necessarily, but that is my focus. Every day I want to get better. And I tackled the big important stuff, the stuff where I would say I was a giant asshole when I was 23 years old. I tackled that stuff. And then the rest of it has been refinement and just kind of making more and more distinctions as I get older and understanding myself better and better. And really just being more honest with myself as I get older.
It's so interesting to me, Francisco, because I don't think it's dumb to say or to think that it's dumb to invest in your own
No, no,
self-development
it's
on a
not dumb to
daily
it
basis.
it just sounds dumb to say because it sounds like an exaggeration, but it is really true, like, this is what I do every day.
And I do share a similar action, daily, from, you know who Brian Tracy is, I'm sure, where he
Sure,
talks
I
about.
listened to his tapes endlessly in the '90s.
Yeah. He talks about the screen of beliefs. We all have a
Mhm.
screen of beliefs that we filter information through and make decisions based on that
Yes.
screen of beliefs. And when you run into a situation where you're having a disagreement with another human being, I try to say to myself, am I filtering this information they're telling me based on my screen of beliefs? And that's why I'm disagreeing with them? Or is it just that the information that they're providing is false? So I think that that's such a great point you make, in terms of belief systems.
And it gets more fundamental than that. I wanna give you a very simple and brief illustration of how powerful our brains are, our minds, so to speak, right? And I'll use a universal experience. You have to get out the door to go to some place where you don't wanna be late, and you can't find your keys. And you go to the nightstand, and you go to the coffee table, and you go to the kitchen counter. It's not there. You still can't find your keys, and you're exasperated because now you're even later than you were a few minutes ago, right? And you really need to get out the door, and the pressure is mounting, and you go back to the nightstand, and your keys are there. Now, did your keys magically materialize on the nightstand the second time you went to look for them? No, they were there.
Mhm.
So, my question is, why couldn't you see them when they were there all along? And the answer is the way you had your keys pictured in your mind was different than the way they were laying on the nightstand. That's how powerful your brain blinded you to an object in 3D in the world because you had it pictured That was a filter.
Hmm.
Your brain filtered out the reality of your key sitting right in front of you. That's powerful. And then it leads to the question, what else am I missing?
Yeah, what's real, what's not, and is it based on my own perception of reality, or is it actually happening outside? And people that I think have PTSD of certain traumatic events in their life, if something similar triggers that PTSD, they either block it out or have some emotional reaction to it. And the other thing is, I saw it not too long ago. This wasn't a physical object in real space time, but there was a professor standing in front of a digital blackboard, and he had a blue dot and a red dot on the board, and he told the entire class that there was a difference between the two dots and one was bigger than the other one. Tell me which one's bigger. And when he did that, everybody had an answer. Some people said blue, some people said red. And then he told them that they were actually identical. But because of the information that they got up front, now all of a sudden, those were two different dots, and they started to perceive them differently than what they really were in real time.
So what that was, since I've been into psychology since I was in junior high, that's referred to as behavior modification. Now we know it as propaganda or advertising or political campaigns or journalism, but it started off as behavior modification. And the guy that invented it was named Edward Bernays, and he was Sigmund Freud's nephew. So he came from a very powerful,
Wow.
therapeutic family. And yeah, you can, you can, um, you can get people to see or not see, uh, sorry to say not see, but you can get people to see or miss seeing whatever you want through behavior modification. You know, um, Edward Bernays came to prominence right around World War One. The first president that hired him was Woodrow Wilson,
Mm.
and his goal, because he's known as the father of PR, public relations, but his goal was to just teach how to communicate with the masses to do what he called reputation management. That's why it's public relations, right? But other people noticed that his techniques could manipulate the masses, and the other people that noticed that were named Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler. Okay, so that's how powerful propaganda is. And that's how equally powerful your belief systems are, because your belief systems are your own propaganda.
Right. And it kind of ties into, what you've talked to me about, which is the big American lie, and something I've heard you say before as well, in one of your podcasts where you say the artificial narrative of liberals versus conservatives, when most polls claim we are actually think the same way on most of the very important subjects. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that, like you just said, people don't realize how far back in time, although human history is small compared to the relative time that this planet's been around, people don't realize how far back in time these ideas of being able to manipulate the masses have been around and have been adopted. So, at the core, talk to me about, how we all really end up agreeing, and the political sides don't really exist.
Right. Yeah. At the end of the day, this is something Bill Clinton said, and because he's an inveterate liar, I fact checked him on this, but it turns out that he was telling the truth. He said in a speech many, many years ago that 1/100th of a percent of DNA is what separates all human beings, right? And of course, we're talking about the physical appearance. Um, all this stuff about culture and country and religion and politics, it's all nonsense that has nothing to do with the reality of what we are as a being. Like, I laugh when someone says to me, my culture's really into family. And I go, really? You think that's unique in any way? Like, please name me the culture that's not into family, you know? Like, oh, my culture's really into music. My culture's really into food. No, human beings are into these things, okay? And to your point about this whole, like, Hatfield McCoy, Democrat, Republican nonsense, all the polls show that if you make it a Venn diagram, It's barely the edges that are different, and most of the differences are really not impactful at all. Most people, what do most people want? They wanna eat every day because we have to, right? So we need food, we need fresh water to drink, we need clean air to breathe. So those are the three things that a human organism needs to be alive, right? So that's what we want. We most of us prefer to sleep indoors, and we want to take care of the people that we care about, right? And we want, in a general way, happiness. I think part of that happiness includes a few orgasms along the way, but that might just be me. But I have a feeling that that's pretty universal also, right? But that's what people want. Like, oh, should two boys be allowed to kiss? Most people say, "Who gives a shit?"
Right. Right.
Right? You
Yeah.
know,
Well, go
"Oh,
ahead.
should
Kiss
two
him.
should two boys be allowed to marry? Who gives a shit?" You know? We agree, less guns, we agree, on all of the important hot button issues, quote unquote, most people agree on what the outcome should be there. So that just tells you that we're all the same, like, oh, I was born in this country, so that means something different. Like in the country I was born in, a third of the country is Haiti, and Dominicans and Haitians hate each other. It's made up nonsense. The Tutsis and the Hutus, the Northern Islands, the Northern Irish, the Sunnis and the Shias, all of these people are the same people, and they're beefing with each other over imaginary bullshit. So that's part of the big lie that we're different somehow.
Yeah, and I posted that on Facebook a while ago. Is like, there is no, race, religion, and stuff that separates us. It's all really created by external sources to divide people.
Yeah.
We're really the same amount of humans sharing the same resources on the same planet. And the sooner that humans, if they ever do, figure that out, the better off we probably will all be, right? So
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole Shangri-La and all that. I don't know if humans uh in our current incarnation possess the facility for that. I,
right.
I I don't see it happening anytime soon. And the reason for my cynicism, I mean, I'm jaded as hell, I'm old and bitter, and I'm jaded. And the thing that really solidified my cynicism was Sandy Hook. 2012, 20 children ages 6 and 7 get murdered by some psycho wielding, a high capacity assault weapon, and nothing was done. And I was like, well, if dead children can't motivate Americans to get their act together, I guess nothing will.
Mm.
Now, I sincerely hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't think I am.
Well, I don't think you are either because again, it's a very traumatic episode in human history and in our more recent time. How do you think, Francisco, then moving forward from situations like that and traumatic experiences, how do people protect themselves and their families, whether it's from misinformation or just in general?
I'll take a page out of Helen Keller's book and sort of say that this isn't a direct quote of hers, but the idea of protecting yourself is an illusion. There's nothing to protect yourself from, right? What you can do is educate yourself enough to be a decent human being. Educate yourself enough to be able to make a contribution to other human beings. And that contribution isn't financial, although it can be. If giving money during a crisis is a thing to do, then of course do it if you can. But really, on a practical, everyday level, and this is something that I believe humans excel at. You know, if we were to believe mainstream media and their version that life is just constant carnage and people are murdering each other all over the place, we'd be walking over dead bodies everywhere we went. Okay. But that's not the reality of what humans are doing with each other on a day to day basis. Right. Like something as simple as driving to work, we're all cooperating.
Yeah, we are.
Right? We have to trust strangers that we're all gonna cooperate and do the right thing so that nobody gets killed on our way to work, right? When you step into an elevator, you have to trust that someone that you don't know made sure this fucking thing's not gonna plunge to the ground and kill you.
And people just don't even think about that. They take it, I
No.
don't want to say for granted, but in a way, I feel like people do, and they don't realize there's so much lower under the surface collaboration that humans do together that drive your everyday existence, you know? So when I see
Yeah.
people argue on Facebook, for example, are they doing that really in the streets when they walk by each other in the grocery store? Like, you don't know what somebody else's views are or anything. Most of the time, at least in the Northeast, people tend to not say hi as much when they walk by each other. But, in other areas of the country, hey, how are you? But, the arguing and things like that is, again, another artificial thing.
Yeah, a lot of areas of the country are very, very polite and also racist, but,
Well,
that's
that
fine.
too. Well, that too. Yeah. Well, not the United States, like you said earlier, but
Yeah,
what?
by the way, I was stealing a joke from, Fortune Feimster. She said that, the South is known for politeness and racism, so that's kind
That's
of
so
funny.
crazy. That's funny. What are I guess you kind of said it, making a contribution to other humans. I was gonna say in 2024 and moving into the future, whatever that might look like, um, what are some ways that people can feel more connected to each other? And what's, a good if you had to generalize, which is hard to do, I know, but what's a good belief system that people should carry moving forward in their lives? If it's not just contributing to other humans, what else?
I think, people need to, realize that there is no such thing as the future. It's totally conceptual, just like there's no such thing as the past, right? The past is stuff that happened that is in our memory but can't be changed, right? So fretting over the past is useless. It's never tomorrow. When you wake up, it's always today, right? So, along with that realization, I think we should respect the fact that no matter what your philosophy is, whether it's religious, whether it's non religious, whether it's scientific, it doesn't matter. All of the best thinkers can only account for the idea that we have one life and that we have an expiration date.
Mhm.
You can debate all you want about the possibility of other stuff after you die.
Right.
I tend to think that the sand dwellers that didn't know what bacteria was did not hold the key to the universe, but that's my own bias. Um, but if you really appreciate the idea that this go around is the only show and that people that you love might disappear one day and that you are going to disappear one day, which is why my podcast is called The Persistent Rumor, because I used to talk about the persistent rumor of death, which I get from Shakespeare, right? So, because I get a lot of my stuff from Shakespeare, because why not, right? Um, but once that I lock these ideas in for myself, I found that my behavior changed in subtle ways. Like the fact that I don't get off the phone with people I care about without saying I love you,
Sure.
because one day we're going to have the last phone call that we're ever going to have, you know? And so I like to remind the people that I love them, and time is a tricky thing too, because I heard someone say this and it really reoriented my concept of time. Like a lot of us have either parents or loved ones or whatever that live far away from us. And very often, the way our society is structured is that you only get to see these people once a year. And there were two guys talking online. I think I saw this on Instagram. One guy was like, "Yeah, I visit my parents once a year." And the guy just bluntly asked him, "How many years do you think your parents have left?" And he said, "Five." And he said, "So you realize you don't have 5 years left with your parents, you have 5 visits left." And I went, "Damn, that's like vivid," and that really snapped me to attention, and it became another piece of my philosophy to just respect time. And I think if you can line up all of those things, understanding that we all have an expiration date, the people that we care about and love are not going to be there forever, and whatever the logistics of your life are really dictate a lot about what time means to you, then I think we can start getting closer to that paradigm that you described. And I think a healthy dose of empathy would go a long way, because I remember, there was one of those, Facebook questionnaires, which no one should ever fill out, because that's all just information harvesting. But one of the questions was, if you could have a superpower, what would it be? And my answer immediately was compassion, because imagine if every human being had compassion for every other human being, 98% of the shit that we're doing to each other would disappear immediately,
That's a fact.
including blithely sitting back while other people suffer.
Right. And it's so interesting to me because, you mentioned the parents thing and being, and I saw that same clip about being able to see them only really five more times. And I think that whether it's the parent child dynamic or a loved one of any type, it does work in both ways because right now is all we have, like you mentioned earlier. So being able to put differences aside, because like you said, and I said, through that this conversation, we're not so different, you and I, right? That's part of the reason I rolled with that when we talked offline. Um, it's too, I don't want to say short to allow those differences to get in between us, but understand that we are going to view things differently at times, but I love you anyway, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that compassion and empathy for the human experience, if we all did just have that a little bit more, I think that the problems, like you said, that most people have would dissipate.
Yeah. And the other thing I was just thinking about as you were talking, because you brought this to mind, is that one of the biggest benefits, and possibly the biggest benefit, of self-development is that by the time I had been into it for about 6 or 7 years, and it occurred to me that I finally really knew myself. The second thing that occurred to me was, if I know myself, I know everybody else. And I believe that. I believe if you know yourself, you know everybody else, because as we said, we're all the same.
Hmm.
And that became a springboard to make it easier for me to connect to other people, because here's one thing that we know for sure. Scientists say that there's been roughly 100 to 150 billion people that have walked across planet Earth. The one thing we know without a doubt is that no two of them had the same life,
Right.
right? Even twins living in the same home are not going to have the same life. And why is that? Because it's not what happens that matters. It's what you make up about what happens that matters, right?
Hmm.
Another Shakespeare quote from Hamlet: "There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so."
Hmm.
And so we're all just experiencing life and making up different meanings for what we experience. But at our core, we are the same. And if you just understand that, if you can look beyond the superficial, and understand that it's not who we are that is the significant thing, because who we are is the personality, right? That's who we are. What we are is the core, and that's the universal thing.
Yeah, 100%. And, Francisco, you shared with me a while ago on multiple occasions, another quote by Paul J. Meyer. And I'm curious, when did you first learn is what I want to know, and how did it shape your belief system? But the quote is, whatever you vividly imagine, ardently desire, sincerely believe, and enthusiastically act upon must inevitably come to pass.
Yeah. I learned that, I got that, December 28th, 1986.
Wow, to the date he knows. I
The
love
reason the reason I know that is because it was a business trip. I was visiting this company to see if I was gonna get involved with the company, and we left December 26th, which was a Friday, and then so I stayed Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, as we were leaving, they handed us an information packet, and there was one page that had that quote on it, and Paul
Mm,
J. Meyer was the CEO of that company, and he was also a motivational speaker. And what I came to understand is that is a perfect idea expressed perfectly. There's not an ounce of fat on that. There's no word that you can remove or add that would benefit that sentiment. And it is the foundation for doing anything that you want to do in life. Whether you want to lose 10 pounds or you want to run a multinational conglomerate, the mechanism is the same. Like, if you look at everything around you outside of what planet Earth created, what everything that human beings created started in someone's mind. They had to vividly imagine something. And, and what's interesting is that there's a modifier at each part of the main point of that, because it doesn't say whatever you imagine, because we can imagine anything and we can imagine things very casually, but to vividly imagine something is different. You can't invent a chair without vividly imagining a chair, right? So once you embrace that sentence, you have the formula to at least move in the direction of achieving what you want. There's no guarantee that you're going to,
mhm.
but this is the only sentence I've ever heard that perfectly describes the process of achieving your goals.
So again, like you said, there's no guarantee, but if you're trying and you are enthusiastically, not just acting upon something, but enthusiastically acting upon it and sincerely believe in the potential of the end result, would you say that that would be the best advice you would give someone who might be writing their own underdog story, somebody that is facing rather some challenges or obstacles in their life that may seem insurmountable?
Yeah, match that quote up with what Nietzsche said. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right?
Hmm.
That's how I sort of summarize my experience with racism. It didn't kill me and it made me stronger. And another thing I'll say with regard to achieving goals, I failed a lot in my life. I've tried more businesses than the average person does. I failed over and over again, but here's the beauty of uh, really throwing yourself into your life, because even though I failed to get the outcome that I was targeting, the people I met along the way, the skills that I developed along the way, the things I did along the way, the places I went along the way were amazing.
Right.
My best friend is a man I met at a job that I failed at, right? So what should I focus on? Should I think about, "Oh my god, I failed at this job," or should I focus on the fact that I met my best friend?
Yeah, and realizing that that means that that job or career wasn't actually a failure, because look at the end, the result that actually came out of it was having your best friend.
Well, the beauty of it is 2 things can be true at the same time. It was a failure, and I found my best friend.
True, true. Well, that's a good point. Yeah, 100%. A- As we close out here, Francisco, number one, always grateful for our time together, and thank you for being gracious with your time as well. I don't take that lightly that you come on here and spend time with me. Um, as we close out, if I have a great American underdog question I ask everybody, if you had a magic cell phone and you could leave a message for your younger self, what message would you leave them?
My wise ass meter always kicks off first and foremost. So the first thing I would say is don't worry about women. You're going to get laid a lot.
I love it. I love it.
But more in keeping with the theme of our conversation, um, I would just say um, always be daring. You know, don't ever, ever, ever let fear rob you of your life. Because when you give in to fear, the person victimizing you is you, right? So don't allow that to happen. And I can say that for the most part, I've lived that. I've rarely ever let fear stop me from doing anything. That's why I've tried over and over again to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I finally figured out that I stink at it, but the reason I was willing to do it over and over again, the reason I'm willing to create content in podcasting is just because whatever doubts and fears come into my mind. And here's a last thought. None of this stuff is going to stop you from thinking negatively. What it's going to stop you from doing is giving in to the negativity, right? You're still going to be human. You're still going to feel what you feel. You're still going to think what you think. It's just going to give you the ability to take a beat and look for the other way.
So good, man. Oh, you always get I always get like in my own head about things and just readjust my whole mindset after we have a conversation. So I thank you. Um, who at this stage of your life, Francisco, do you learn from? You know, what where do you get your information from as you continue to learn, develop?
Again, I hate to be so broad, but it's really everywhere. Like I can hear a song lyric and like look at the world differently. I can watch a film and understand myself better. I mean, it's everywhere, man. Like I know that social media is a double-edged sword. Okay. I'm aware of all the negatives. Look, I mean, everything that humans create has the potential to change our experience of life. I mean, like literally creating the alphabet rewired our brain. Okay. So it's, and some of that has limitations, right? But one of the things that I love about social media is that it broadened out my ability to get information from different perspectives. And I learn all the time. I feel like I'm learning something every day. Like I
Me
just
too.
I just sent my son something to I think it was it was a clip, Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about how when a tree is cut down, the other trees that surround it send it nutrients through the root system. And stumps wind up living on for hundreds of years because the trees recognize that that the stump needs, nourishment and they I'm like, and again, what is that an example of? Compassion, right? And when I saw that, I immediately texted it to a few people. I posted it to Facebook because it's like, oh, I just found something good. My inclination is to share it with the world. And so that somebody else can have that same experience that I just had. And so I really do. I learn from everything, from everyone. A 2-year-old can teach me something. I seek knowledge in all things, and sometimes I see it in things that no one else sees it in. Like I'll end with this. I watched the film Forrest Gump in 1994, and it was a brilliant film, won an Academy Award, all that stuff. But I've never heard someone talk about a theme in this film that I recognized when I watched it. And every time someone asked Forrest to do something, or they told him, like, run, Forrest, or do you want to get in the shrimping business with me? Do you want to play ping pong? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Whatever someone asked him to do, he never thought about it. He just said, okay.
Yeah.
So the metaphor that I took from that is say yes to life. And 5 years later, my best female friend called me up and said, I got a woman that I want you to meet. And I started literally, I put my tongue to the roof of my mouth because I was ready to say no. I was ready to say no to her. And I remembered Forrest Gump. And I said, yeah, sure. Give me her number. That became my second ex-wife, right? I married this woman. We were together over 10 years, and she is one of my best friends to this day. I communicate with her constantly. Love her to death. One of the most amazing people I've ever known. And I would have missed out on that by saying no. And it's just another example of learning from everything.
Yeah. So really the closing message for our audience would be learn from everything and be open to it and look for the lessons. And sometimes the lessons are going to find you. Is there anything else you want to add to that closing message for the audience, Francisco?
I think that'll do it. And remember to brush daily.
Yeah. I love it, man. Again, thank you so much for joining me, Francisco. This has been another episode of Great American Underdog, where we share stories of strength and success. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.